Howdy, it's Kyle talking about place names in the US and how they might carry different pronunciations in different parts of the country. And there are quite a few places like this. I'm going to break the video up into 3 segments. The first will be place names that are found in different parts of the country. Each one might carry a different pronunciation. The second will be individual places in which there might be a differing opinion on how it's pronounced, or sometimes there's an actual way to pronounce it and many folks pronounce it wrong. And then the third segment will be just kind of strange place names that are often pronounced incorrectly. And as a bonus, a real quick audio-only cameo from my Southern wife as she reads off some of the names we'll be going over in this video to see how a Southerner might pronounce them. So let's talk about some of these place names and how the pronunciations might differ in different parts of the country. I'm going to start off with one that we all know well, Houston, Texas, sometimes Houston, Texas, but there are small towns with this name in New York and Georgia, except there they're pronounced Houston. There are 2 cities with this name in 2 small states that border each other about 100 miles apart. The more well-known one is Newark, New Jersey, and the other one is Newark, Delaware. Another one where one of the cities is much more well-known than the other, we have Miami, Florida, but if you go up to Oklahoma, it's Miami. Another one with the same name in 2 bordering states, 2 different pronunciations. In North Carolina, it's Beaufort. In South Carolina, it's Beaufort. Here's one where you have at least 3 different ways to pronounce it. Lafayette, Indiana, Lafayette, Louisiana, and Lafayette, Georgia. Although it's worth pointing out that for Lafayette, Georgia, the F is capitalized. When you first see this word, you'll probably think of Berlin, Germany first. However, in the US, we do things a little bit differently. Whether you're in New Hampshire or in Maryland, it's Berlin. Another old city that we pronounce differently in the US, you have Cairo in Egypt. But here in the US, you have Cairo, Georgia, and Cairo, Illinois. And here we have a 3-on-2 melee, a full-on brouhaha, if you will. In this corner, we have Pennsylvania, Ohio, and South Carolina with Lancaster. And in this corner, we have California and Nebraska with Lancaster. Okay, so this next segment is going to be single places that have differing pronunciations, but one is certainly the correct one. Starting off with this one here, you might think it's like the singer David Bowie, but if you're in Maryland or Texas, you know that it's Bowie. I think most people know this one, but the capital of South Dakota looks like it might be pronounced Pierre, but it's actually pronounced Pier, kind of like the fishing plank out at the beach. This is one that I think the vast majority of Americans pronounce wrong. Most people, including myself, say Boise as if the S is a Z, but it's actually pronounced Boise. And the people from there will always be quick to remind you. One that the comment section reminded me of was this one right here. I pronounced it Zion National Park. I think most people pronounce it that way as well, but people jumped on me. It's actually pronounced Zion. And right near Zion National Park is this town. There's another one with that same name in West Virginia. Looks like it might be pronounced hurricane, but it's actually hurricane. Alright, so what about the Big Easy? The proper pronunciation is New Orleans. I think there are some older folks that say Norlands, but nobody says New Orleans or Nolans. But in a plot twist, Louisiana doesn't have counties, it has parishes, and the parish in which New Orleans is located is called Orleans Parish. New Orleans, Louisiana, in Orleans Parish. But just like New Orleans, we also have New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, New Zealand, New Haven. However, for whatever reason, there are a number of people that for the last one say New Haven, emphasizing the new. But keeping it in a new state, we have this state park in New Jersey. You really want it to be pronounced the way it looks, but it's actually pronounced Chesapeake or Chesapeake. But it would be really cool if it actually was Cheesequake State Park. Here you have 2 towns in Michigan 5 miles apart from each other, one on the lakeshore, one on an island, 2 different spellings, but they're pronounced the same way. They're both Mackinac. I figured I would go north of the border for the next couple of ones, starting with this city right here. I think most Americans, including myself, say Toronto with emphasis on that second T, but I think most Canadians drop that second T sound and say Toronto. And after too long of a night of partying, you might get Toronto. I posed this question to the community a couple of months ago, and these are the results. Keeping it in Canada is the name of this province. I think most people know not to say Newfoundland, but I always thought it was Newfoundland, emphasis on the new and a lund at the end. However, I stand corrected by the Canadians themselves. It's actually Newfoundland. The emphasis is at the land at the end. And similarly, to go along with that, it's also Labrador. So this is the name of the province. So it's not Newfoundland and Labrador, it's Newfoundland and Labrador. But do keep in mind, they do have a time zone that's a half an hour off, so things aren't really right there. And the last Canadian one is this city. It's the capital of the province of Saskatchewan. It looks like it would be pronounced Regina. It's actually pronounced Regina. So come to Regina to cure your angina. That sounds about right. And now for this city in northeastern Pennsylvania. This is the only one on this list, I think, that there's not a consensus amongst the locals as to how to pronounce this. From what I have gathered, you can pronounce it either Wilkes-Barre or Wilkes-Barre, and it's okay. Just as long as you don't pronounce it Wilkes-Barre. Okay, so moving just off the continent here, we have this sea. My wife and I have been fortunate enough to have visited this region several times. We've been to 4 different countries, 6 different islands, and every single person on every single island we've met pronounced it Caribbean. So I'm going to go ahead and go with the locals on this one, and it's Caribbean. Here's one that I think a good majority of the people get right. It's pronounced Syracuse, but I think there is a decent number of people that pronounce it Syracuse. One of the oldest cities in the U.S., one of the biggest cities in Virginia. It's not pronounced Norfolk, it's Norfolk. And then we have this one here. I think the vast majority of the people pronounce it Detroit, but sometimes you'll hear people say Detroit, and I think it's more used almost like dramatic effect. I don't think anybody really says Detroit as it comes out naturally. I think it's Detroit, but I do like saying Detroit. Now I want to go over a few that you've probably seen on a map but might not know how to pronounce. Starting with this one here. This is a city about an hour and a half north of New York City, and it's pronounced Poughkeepsie. Of all the ones in this video, I think this is the one whose pronunciation is the furthest away from where it looks. This is a city about a half an hour or so west of Boston, and it's pronounced Worcester. Take these broken wings to Worcester, Worcester, Massachusetts. I've seen this city on maps my entire life. It's a suburb in the Seattle-Tacoma metro area, and I have never known how it's pronounced until I did the research for this video. And even so, I still can't really pronounce it. It's Puyallup. It's not Puyallup, it's Puyallup. That's hard to say, I don't like it. And probably the city that has the largest discussions going on with how you pronounce it is this one in Kentucky. There are several different ways you can pronounce this. Usually in the north and the west, you'll often hear Louisville. When you get more into the south, you'll hear Louisville. But in watching a lot of videos of people from the local news pronouncing it, and Muhammad Ali of all people pronouncing it, I think most people who live there do a combination of Louisville and Louisville with they keep the Lua, but then the Ville at the end with a Louisville. So it's not the northern Louisville or the southern Louisville, but kind of in the middle, which is pretty fitting because of all the cities in the country that kind of straddle the north and south, Louisville is probably the one that you think of first. And as a side note, in the South, when you have a city that ends with V-I-L-L-E, it's going to be pronounced Vol and not Ville. So you have Knoxville, Tennessee, Greenville, South Carolina, Gainesville, Florida, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Starkville, Mississippi. The only one where you might get a Ville would be Jacksonville. But in the rest of the South, they're going to get a bunch of Vols. And now I want to talk about a few of the states. I think most of the states have an agreed upon pronunciation, but a few have a little bit of a difference of opinions. So what about this one here? I think the vast majority of people pronounce it right with Oregon, but you will get an occasional person pronouncing it Oregon, and those people are called wrong. In similar fashion, the vast majority of people I think pronounce this properly Colorado, but you do get a decent number of country folk out there saying Colorado, but I think the pronunciation closer to Spanish is the correct one here. But it's the opposite with this state. Most people pronounce it like I do with the hard A, Nevada. But you do get some folks pronounce it with the Spanish pronunciation, Nevada. Here's another one where I think the vast majority of the population pronounces it properly, Missouri. But kind of like Colorado, you might get some country folk out there saying Missouri. However, a lot of the people that say Missouri live there. Although even in state, I think most people pronounce it Missouri. Here's a state with 3 different possible pronunciations. The mainlander tourist way of pronouncing it is Hawaii. I think locals pronounce it something more like Hawaii, a little more staccato as opposed to Hawaii. And in the actual Hawaiian language, I believe it's pronounced Hawaii, with a W having a V sound. And the last state I'll mention is this one. I think a pretty good majority of people pronounce this one Louisiana, but a lot of the people that live there drop the first I sound and pronounce it Louisiana. So if the people that live there are pronouncing it a certain way and most of the people outside of the area are pronouncing it another way, I'm going to go with the people that live there. This thing is pronounced Louisiana. And I wanted to save the most controversial one for last. All my life growing up in California, it was Appalachian. And that's the only way I knew it to be pronounced until I moved to South Carolina about 25 years ago. And that's when I learned it's actually pronounced Appalachian. And I do think this is more of a one is right, one is wrong scenario because literally everybody that lives in this region pronounces it Appalachian. There is nobody in the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia saying Appalachia. And now, as promised, a very short audio-only cameo from my camera-shy wife. She's from South Carolina. She's going to be reading off the names of some of the places I've been talking about in this video so you can hear how a southerner might pronounce some of these towns.
Greenville, Lafayette, Lancaster, Louisville, New Orleans, Beaufort, Syracuse, Toronto, Appalachian, Iowa, Ohio, Nevada, Missouri, Louisiana.
I'm adding this part after I listened to the part where my wife read off the town names. She's from South Carolina and pronounced Lancaster, Lancaster. It's a fairly rural county and it's not in the part of the state she grew up in, but still, I thought that was kind of interesting. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography with a very nerdy perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially Dustin in Denver. I hope you have a great week there. If you're interested in purchasing a pin for the viewer wall map or just to support the channel, please check out my Patreon page with the link in the description. And as always, thank you very much.